Hey there. Good evening. Nice to see you. It's time for the Bronx Buzz. This is Bronx Nets program where we talk to reporters and writers and journalists and editors and all different people who put stuff out about the Bronx. And that this way you get a chance to find out who they are and what they're writing about, what they're thinking about. And in our second segment, we're going to be going to the Mott Haven Film Festival, which is going to be enjoyable for all of us. But right now, let's bring in one of our buddies. It is Ethan Stark Miller. He covers New York City and state politics for AM New York Metro. Nice to see you, Ethan.
Nice to see you, Gary.
You've done a lot of work on this little issue called housing. And the mayor presented a housing plan, which was interesting. I've got a couple of questions to ask about it, but why don't you just tell us in general what Mayor Adams' vision is of how to create more housing in New York City?
Yeah, I mean, so basically, he's rolled out this list of zoning changes that he wants to make that would allow for development in areas that haven't been open to development so far, around like transit stations and making apartment, kind of paving the way for like SE, what is it called again? SRO type housing.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, where there's shared, kitchens and bathrooms and such. So this has been a big push of his to make it easier to build in many swaths of the city where zoning rules that have been added over the decades have made it more difficult. He says that his plan that he released, it was like late last month, would lead to the construction of 100,000 units over the next 15 years if it is actually fully implemented. Previously, he said that he wanted to build 500,000 units in the next 10 years.
Listen, we all want to build all those units.
Yeah.
I vote yes, but there's some issues in there.
Yeah.
Well, now there's a couple of issues. Number one, certainly in the Bronx, where we have the 4 Metro North stations, that would make sense to have more housing. You mentioned transit hubs and things like that. Are we talking about building new housing, or are we talking about conversions?
Both
Nation.
actually. So these, first of all, yes, making it easier to actually build new housing from scratch. But then also, we have a lot of apartment buildings, especially in Manhattan. Not sure, or not apartment buildings, sorry, office buildings, especially in
Office buildings,
Manhattan.
yeah, I was going to ask you certainly about that. That's a big thing.
So yeah, that's been a big thing for the mayor, like converting office space that is now underutilized because of the pandemic, because many companies have terminated their leases or gone to smaller spaces due to remote work, converting those office buildings into housing, which is kind of an onerous process because a lot of these buildings were
Right.
constructed, in a different fashion than you would build an apartment building,
Yeah.
and need, these kind of multi-million dollar conversions. Not sure how many office buildings there are in the Bronx that this would apply to, but
That's
definitely in
probably
Manhattan is
true.
a big thing.
Among the things that I read about it is because, in an office building, you have offices, but one bathroom on the floor. And the question was, would people want to live in a place where they shared bathrooms with their neighbors? Which is, because the plumbing infrastructure may not exist in those office buildings to, put a bathroom in every cubicle, so to speak.
Right.
So we don't know. One of the big sticking points, as I understand, and the city council has taken note of it, is in the plan. Because currently, when you build housing, I think the number is 30%. You need 30%. Let's say you build 100 apartments, then you need 30 parking spaces so that people have a place to park. The mayor wants to kind of do away with that requirement. That's a sticky thing, and the city council, I believe, has rightly said, "Well, wait a minute." Do you know where we're at with that? I mean, because that was a big thing.
Yeah. Well, not exactly sure if there's been any more development on that. The plan was just rolled out a couple of weeks ago, but it's going to need approval from the council, and it's going to go through going to have to go through a bunch of other hoops in order to actually get approved. So there's probably going to be a lot more input and possibly some changes to a controversial rule like that. That was actually something I should have mentioned before. People are very
I brought it up. I brought it up to help you out.
Thank you, Gary. People are very protective of their parking, as we know.
Oh yeah.
Especially in transit deserts, which there's quite a few of in the Bronx,
Right.
and other parts of the outer boroughs. So yeah, it's hard to tell if that part of the plan will
fly.
fully fly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, I believe the Times had a story over the weekend that talked about is parking as bad as you think it is in New York? And they say, yeah, it's worse because we have more cars since the pandemic. I mean, we all know what's going on. I know I live in an apartment building down the block from where these are, as a matter of fact. I live in an apartment building, and I think we got about 85 apartments in this building, and there are like 25 or 30 spaces, and there are many more than 25 or 30 residents who need parking. So that will be an interesting thing. Let's move on to what the mayor said about the migrant crisis and where we are at. And you've done a lot of work on it. So number one, he said the migrant crisis would destroy New York City. And then, he came to the Bronx at the Bronx Chamber event, and he said, well, people are kind of, using their thesaurus on my words. So whatever, maybe that's his way of backing off it. But now the biggest controversy is to suspend the shelter mandate. And that is, we have a rule in New York City that everybody's entitled to shelter. And he wants to suspend that for that quote unquote class of people. Where are we at?
Yeah, so this is like kind of a long, complicated
We
series.
don't have all that much time, but we're going to give you a chance to talk about it.
Yeah, okay. I'll condense it as much as I can. So in May, basically, the administration submitted a motion to a Manhattan Supreme Court judge asking to change this right to shelter, which was established in 1981 through a court decision called a consent decree. And now they've revised their request. I mean, basically, they wanted to suspend it whenever the city lacked the resources or capacity. So we have all these, now it's like around 63,000 migrants in shelters. They're arguing if we have to keep, sheltering more and more people, this endless stream, then we're just not going to have enough space, and it's going to completely deplete the city's resources.
Well, you brought up a very interesting point there. So the question is, if the city can show it doesn't have the resources, and at this point, I think people believe, and the mayor believes he can show that we don't have the resources, would this, allow for that exception? I guess that's the real question. Of course, advocates and certainly many city council members weren't thrilled.
Yeah, and that's still an outstanding question of whether the court will allow it. And actually, the administration has changed their request to make it even broader, where they're asking now for the court to suspend the right to shelter in a time of emergency when the mayor or the governor has declared a state of emergency. So that's even broader. And yes, advocates and city council members, the more progressive city council members, are definitely not happy about this.
Right.
They're fiercely defending the city's right to shelter and arguing that, changes that are intended to decrease pressure from the migrant crisis are going to end up impacting any homeless New Yorker.
Right. In other words, we got away with that one. Well, it is an emergency situation for generally homeless people.
Right.
Well.
Anytime could be an emergency. Yeah.
Well, you know what is interesting to me is the timing of it, because all of these things will be resolved in some form by the city council, but there's nothing to be done now. You can't even have the discussion because they're all running for re-election in just a couple of weeks. So there's really, you and I can have this conversation, but nothing's really going to happen until we get through the first of the year, and they get back to session and find out who the new city council is, et cetera, et cetera. There was one other thing that I thought was interesting that you wrote about, and that was the idea that the New York City housing voucher recipients can apply for subsidies for city housing beyond the city limits. So if you were, I guess, receiving a subsidy, and then I guess, I don't know, you move to Westchester or Rockland or upstate, you can still get a subsidy. Interesting question, and I guess the mayor is trying to encourage people to get the heck out of here. I mean, I don't know. I'm just guessing there.
Yeah, well, I think this was kind of billed as another relief valve for the city's shelter system. If more homeless New Yorkers moved out of the city using these vouchers in other, municipalities around the state, that would free up some space in the shelters. So, there'd be more space for incoming migrants. I mean, the plan was applauded by advocates, who said it's good to give people more options. But upstate counties that have been pretty resistant to accepting migrants in their communities were also resistant to this idea. So
I'm sure they are.
We'll see if it gets met with legal challenges.
Well, on the other hand, can they really have input? I mean, if the city wants to, do this, I mean, I don't know that a municipality elsewhere can say you can't do this. Listen, before we run out of time, just curious for you covering this mayor. Difficult to cover? Is it tougher around City Hall? He's basically said, I don't care what those reporters say. I want to, do what I want to do. Do you? What's it been like? I mean, doing the great work that you do.
Well, thank you, Gary. I don't have much to compare it to. I didn't really cover previous.
That's true.
Years.
You're doing local, yeah.
But I mean, I think he's not always necessarily the most, or the administration isn't always necessarily the most cooperative. But I'm not sure if that's necessarily very different from previous administrations. I mean, he recently made this decision that he's only going to take questions called off-topic questions, where reporters can ask anything they want,
right?
Not the stated topic of the event.
Yeah, he was very particular about that for a while,
right? And now we can only ask those questions once a week on Tuesdays.
We're recording this on a Tuesday. I hope I'm not messing you up here.
No, actually,
you have one chance to get your questions in.
Just concluded a little while ago.
Oh, there you go.
But yeah, I mean, the accessibility this administration versus others, it's hard to tell for me because of my.
Right, fair enough. Listen, you're great. Ethan Stark-Miller covers New York City and state politics for AM New York Metro, and he comes on our show to kind of fill us in with what's going on. Thank you so much for joining us on the Bronx Buzz. We'll take a short break right now, and then we'll go to the Mott Haven Film Festival. What a joy.